there's a lot to be said for being mindful of what you consume. And there's a well-known personal development speaker named Jim Rohn. Now, he's passed away now, but he taught Tony Robbins. For any of you that know Tony Robbins, he was mentored to Tony Robbins. And he used to say, guard the doorway of your mind. Stand firm at the doorway of your mind. Be mindful of what you're consuming, because what you're consuming is going in. And anything that goes in has to come out. And we know all too well, if we put junk food into our bodies, then junk food is what we're going to become. That is the fuel for our bodies. That's what our bodies are seeking for nourishment, and we're giving it the sugar and the processed foods and all of these things. And the same is true with our minds. So if we're consuming junk content, if we're consuming distraction, if we're consuming things which are negative that we don't want to see, then essentially we're conditioning ourselves to see more of those things. I'm not going to stand on a pedestal here and say that that's bad and that you shouldn't do it, because everyone's free to make their own choice, and I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. But I feel we all have a duty of care, those of us who have some degree of awareness of these things, to share with the world, with those of you who may be inclined to be looking for a way out of that pain, out of the discomfort and the stress and the fear. We have a duty of care to share with you these ways and means by which you can find a different perspective on life. Not just find, but create. And not just create, but enjoy. And all of us have a story to tell. All of us have been through some process of discovery. Some of us are still going through that process. Some of us are going through the process of recreating ourselves. And some of us are going through the process of discovering that who we are and who we take ourselves to be and the image that we have of the world is simply not representative of the truth of what this world is, which is infinite potential. And the moment any one of us get fixed in one perspective, we get fixed in one position or one belief, what happens is we stop growing. Our growth is never this thing that's unavailable to us if we form a firm belief of something. It simply becomes obscured, which is good news. But if we form these fixed perspectives, that's when we start to meet the world rigidly, and we start to try and bend the world to meet our viewpoints. And there are many people out there doing this. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong. Some of the things that they're doing may be causing harm to others. But everyone acts in accordance with what they believe to be true. And that's the important point here. So if you are taking in information, if you are taking in stories of fear or pain or judgment from those around you, from social media, from the news, from other sources, then this is the life that you are going to live. If you are taking in stories of hope and of possibility and of freedom and of joy and of abundance, then that is the world you're going to live in. And it doesn't mean that the potential to experience pain ceases to exist, but it becomes far less likely. It doesn't mean that suddenly people in the world stop suffering and everything is okay, because of course that's something that humans have been doing for such a long time. It's well ingrained and will take some time to work itself out. But every single one of us who goes through the process of discovering that there is more to life than suffering breaks that cycle piece by piece. And if you have children, if you have families, then the best thing that you can do for them is break yourself free. Create a world for yourself and for the people around you that represents the goodness within you, rather than representing a desire to avoid the inevitable apparent suffering which so much of the world seems to be lost in. Which of course is only how it appears. What's commonly accepted as truth is simply a perspective. And because we are biologically animals, we are to some degree still wired for fear and for danger. So we are tuned in very acutely to all of the signs which suggest we are some way placing ourselves close to harm. And that's why news, certainly negative news, spreads so quickly, because it speaks to that part of us which is on alert. It speaks to that part of us which is conscious of danger. And by the way, social media creators, as in the platform owners and news station owners, they know this and they exploit this. They're taking advantage of this, and they have done for many years. My intention is to illuminate to those of you who are so inclined the possibility, which always exists, of a different kind of nourishment, one which is not dependent on seeing the worst of this world and living in the worst of this world, but one which is dependent on seeing the best of this world, independent of circumstance. So wherever you find yourself, whether you are working or you're looking for work, whether you are renting a house or owning a house, or you're living out of your car or your truck, whether you have a partner and children, or whether you've just been divorced or you're single, whether you have experienced tremendous amounts of hardship in your life or whether you've never experienced hardship, every single one of you has the opportunity to see the best of this world, but you have to look for it. And that's why it's called a conscious act. Unconsciousness is to allow yourself to be fed something without the filter of discernment. Unconsciousness is to take in what you are told at face value and to accept it as truth without question. And there are many people who will benefit from your doing so. However, there are more people who will benefit from your questioning. There are more people who will benefit from your conscious choice of what to think, what to look at, what to read, where to gain information from, and to question that information, to consider its truth, to consider maybe that there is an equal and opposite truth, which is of the same amount of value, and to put both in perspective. And I may have mentioned this before on the channel. If I haven't, then forgive me, but it's widely attributed to Einstein that the measure of intelligence is to be able to hold two opposing opinions, to see things from both perspectives, to see something from the perspective of someone who has an argument on one side and someone who has an argument on the other side. Generally, this is what's called debate. Well, he says, I understand it, that's how it's called. We find ourselves now where people are fixed on a belief or an opinion or a perspective, and that is defined as truth. And when it's defined as truth, there is no other possibility of things being different. That's where war and conflict arise, not just at the macro level, but at the level of families, workplaces, educational institutions. Lots of people at some level are at war with each other. And that's what we're doing when we are defending our opinions and we are defending our beliefs and our perspectives. We are effectively waging war on others who do not have the same opinion or perspective or belief as us, rather than providing a space or an opportunity to hear their perspective, to hear their belief, and not necessarily to adopt it as our own truth, but to respect that each individual has the right to have an opinion. Each individual has the right to think for themselves, including you. And if what you're thinking is not serving you, then the chances are it's not yours. This is a thought that has either been suggested to you many times and you have adopted as your own, or this is something that has been told to you, either through your family or through your culture, at a time in your life in the early years when to question these things seemed inappropriate or impractical. But the good news is, as I say, that can change. With the increasing information available on how the psychology of a human being operates and how the animal system of a human operates, there are many organizations out there leveraging our bias towards fear to make us do things or to encourage us to do things which are not in our favor but in theirs. Now, at the base level, this can be anything from purchasing products, because those things will bring us happiness or fix our problems. They can be things like forming a political stance or a view of an economy or perhaps another country or another race of people or a gender of people. And when our culture and our world becomes divided in this way, then we start to see others as opponents. We start to see them as oppressors. We start to see them as enemies. And what do we do when we have opponents and enemies and oppressors? We fight them. And how many fights are there going on around you, within you, in our world? And how many of those fights are necessary and yield positive and meaningful outcomes? Very few. And so guard the doorway of your mind. Be vigilant with what you are feeding yourself. Have the courage to question what you are being told, either internally or with the people that you trust and respect. You don't need to go to social media and challenge everything that you hear and wage war against everybody in the comments, because that gets us nowhere. But you are entitled to think for yourself and to consider whether or not the things that you are being told are representative of our species as a whole, or simply just representative of one or a small group of individuals, or if they're representative of the views of the channel which is broadcasting them, and whether or not those views are views that you would wish to align with had you the choice. And if they aren't, then you do have the choice. As I say, to choose is to be conscious, to allow yourself to be fed and told without question is not an act of consciousness. And many of us, including me, in areas of our lives, we take things as they are told to us and we act accordingly. Now, these cannot be called acts of consciousness. However, as soon as we bring them into light and we question them, then they start to change. Then we can assess and determine whether or not the things that we are thinking and doing in our lives are serving us and the people around us. And if it happens to be the case that they are, then we continue doing them. And every single one of us will have an internal compass, a moral compass of what is right and what is wrong, and that compass will filter through our beliefs, through our expectations, through what we've been told. And as those things change, then perhaps what we consider to be good and bad will also change. Now, I feel if more of us were able to find a greater awareness of the impact of what we are being told and what we are consuming on our lives and the lives of those around us, then we may be slightly more considered with how we spend our attention. And remember, for the limited amount of time each and every one of us have on this planet, we have a finite resource of attention. And the more of that you give to things that you don't want to see, the less of it that you have to spend on things that you do want to see. And I think that's an important point to make. And I myself have increasingly realised this, certainly this year, with some of the things I've experienced and some of the situations I found myself in. It simply doesn't make sense for me to be consuming other people's opinions when those opinions are conflicted, when they are being told to me as if they are true, when they are being broadcast with hate or with some degree of fear. But equally, I don't have to believe anything that anybody says. I can believe anything I am capable of thinking, as can you, and I am able to see the world accordingly. And that is also in a continuous state of change. Just like when we change our diet, our body will respond accordingly. When we change our thinking, our mind and our perspectives will change accordingly, and the way that we show up in life will also change. And if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't serve us, we can go ahead and change it again. We don't have to get stuck in one place. And that's really good news, I feel. So my invitation to you today is to be mindful of what you're consuming, to be mindful of what you are accepting as truth without question, and to take a moment to consider how that's affecting your life, for better or for worse, and how that may have affected your life so far. And furthermore, what may be possible to you if you are to allow yourself to think and feel what you suspect to be true in your heart, which for many of us, I believe, is that humanity and all of life is inherently good. And we are told this in our scriptures, and we're told this in our spiritual traditions, and we're told this in the books, even the books that we read as children, that people are inherently good, and I believe that to be true. People do bad things, yes. There are many people out there who are acting on the belief that the world is a bad place, and it makes sense to them to do those things. And I don't condone them. But that doesn't mean that that's representative of everybody. That person stands alone often. Listen well, question well, and be well. And I'll see you on the next one.